My name is Liam, and I've been hiking alone for years. I've always loved the solitude of untouched forests, the peace, the escape from the chaos of the world. But after that night, the woods don't feel like a haven anymore. They feel like a trap. It started as a routine trip, one of many I'd taken over the years. 3 days deep into a remote stretch of wilderness, away from cell service, away from people. I always felt safer alone in the forest than I ever did in the city. The first 2 days passed without incident. I spent my time following trails, setting up camp by streams, and enjoying the untouched beauty around me. The sounds of the forest, birds chirping, crickets singing, wind rustling through the leaves, were the perfect soundtrack to my escape. But everything changed on the third night. It was just after sunset. I'd set up camp in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. The fire crackled softly as I ate my dinner, the last of my provisions before heading back the next morning. But as I sat there, I realized something was wrong. The forest had gone silent. It wasn't the kind of quiet that came with dusk, when the day creatures settled and the night ones awoke. This was a heavy, unnatural silence. No crickets, no owls, nothing but the faint crackle of my fire and my own breathing. I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing. But the feeling of unease gnawed at me, growing stronger with each passing minute. It felt like the silence was alive, pressing down on me, watching me. That's when I first felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees, the beam slicing through the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but the shifting shadows of branches swaying in the faint breeze. But then, at the edge of the light, I thought I saw movement, a tall figure. Too tall. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking. No response, just the faint rustle of leaves as if something or someone had moved away. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe an animal, startled by the fire. But I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, following me, waiting. I retreated to my tent, zipping it up tightly and clutching my knife for comfort. Sleep was impossible. Every snap of a twig, every faint rustle outside set my nerves on edge. Hours passed, and just as I started to relax, I heard it, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard. It was deep, distorted, and filled with malice. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The growl stopped. For a moment, there was silence again, and then a sound that chilled me to my core. A laugh. A distorted, echoing laugh, like it was coming from everywhere at once. I grabbed my flashlight and knife, unzipped the tent, and stepped outside. The fire had burned low, casting long, flickering shadows across the clearing. I scanned the woods, my flashlight darting from tree to tree. That's when I saw him. A man, if you could call him that, standing completely still between two trees. He was impossibly tall and thin, his limbs almost skeletal. His face was obscured by something, a mask or paint I couldn't tell. But his eyes, they glowed faintly in the dark, like embers in a dying fire. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching me. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. I turned for just a second, and that's when I heard the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, running straight toward me. I spun around, but the man was gone. The footsteps stopped. Terrified, I bolted back to my tent to grab my pack, desperate to get out of there. But when I looked inside, my blood ran cold. Carved into the fabric of the tent, deep and jagged, were the words, "You're not alone." My pack was slashed to ribbons, my gear destroyed. The flashlight flickered, and I heard the laugh again, closer this time. I didn't think. I ran, leaving everything behind, crashing through the underbrush in the pitch dark. Branches tore at my skin, roots tripped me, but I didn't stop. I didn't even breathe until I saw the faint glow of the trailhead parking lot. My car was there, the only one, and I threw myself inside, locking the doors and speeding off without a backward glance. I don't know how I made it out. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. The Rangers dismissed my story, said it was probably exhaustion or a prank. But deep down, I know the truth. Something lives in those woods. If you ever find yourself alone out there and the silence feels too heavy, leave. Don't wait for the watcher to find you.
My name is Jonathan, and I've been a mall Santa for 3 years. It's usually a harmless gig. Put on the suit, listen to kids' wishes, and hand out candy canes. This year, though, something happened that I can't forget. Something I wish I could. It was Christmas Eve, and the mall was about to close. I was exhausted from hours of ho-ho-ho and endless kids climbing onto my lap. Most families had gone home, leaving only a few stragglers wandering the dim, decorated halls. I was about to take off the suit when a little boy approached. He couldn't have been older than 6. His clothes were old and patched, his face pale and gaunt, but what struck me most were his eyes, dark, sunken and lifeless, like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Santa," he said softly, barely audible over the mall's festive music. "Can you help me?" I leaned forward, forcing a jolly smile. "Of course, little one. What do you need?" "My mommy says I've been a bad boy," he whispered. "She said you're coming for me tonight." The words chilled me. Parents told all kinds of weird stories about Santa to scare their kids into behaving, but this was different. There was no mischief in his tone, no giggle or grin, just dread. Before I could respond, the boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "I made this for you," he said, handing it to me. It was a drawing, a crude sketch of a figure dressed like Santa, but wrong. The suit was tattered, the hat torn, and the face was blank, except for hollow black holes where the eyes should be. Behind the figure were what looked like long, twisted fingers reaching for the boy. "Who drew this?" I asked, my voice shaky. "He's coming tonight," the boy said, ignoring my question. "I just wanted to say sorry." Before I could press him further, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the mall. I jumped up to follow him, but when I stepped into the hallway, he was gone. The mall security team hadn't seen any boy matching his description. They told me to head home and enjoy the holiday. I tried, but his words stuck with me. That night, as I sat by the fire with a glass of wine, I couldn't shake the image of the drawing, the twisted figure, the empty eyes. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting to see something staring back at me. Just after midnight, the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, leaving only the faint glow of the dying fire. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the circuit breaker, but everything seemed fine. That's when I heard it, a faint scraping sound coming from the living room. I froze. My flashlight trembled as I crept back toward the sound. The scraping grew louder, more deliberate, like nails dragging across the hardwood floor. When I reached the living room, my heart nearly stopped. The fireplace was empty, the embers cold and dead. In the middle of the room stood a figure in a red suit. But it wasn't me. The suit was filthy, hanging in tattered shreds from a gaunt skeletal frame. The face was obscured by shadow, except for the eyes, empty, black voids that seemed to devour the light. In one bony hand, it held a crumpled piece of paper. My hands shook as I took it from him, my blood running cold. It was the boy's drawing. "I found him!" the figure rasped, its voice like the crackling of dead branches. "Now I'm here for you." The room spun. The last thing I remember was the figure lunging forward, long fingers stretching toward me. I woke up the next morning on the floor, the house eerily quiet. The lights were back on, the fire roaring again as if nothing had happened. But in the corner of the room, my Santa suit hung in shreds. On the floor beneath it was a new drawing. This time it was me.
My name is Ethan, and swimming was always my escape. Growing up near the coast, I spent more time in water than on land, gliding effortlessly through the waves. I joined my local swimming team, often practicing late into the night when the pool was empty. I loved the solitude, until one night changed everything. It was a Wednesday. The facility was quiet, the hum of the overhead lights echoing off the tile walls. My teammates had gone home, but I stayed behind to shave seconds off my lap time. I dove in, the water swallowing me whole as I cut through it like a blade. After a dozen laps, I stopped to catch my breath, floating in the center of the Olympic-sized pool. That's when I noticed something strange. The water was unnaturally still. No ripples, no sounds. I blinked, my chest tightening. Underneath me, the pool looked darker than it should have, like ink spreading through the deep end. I leaned over to peer into the depths, expecting to see the tiled bottom. Instead, I saw nothing. It wasn't the regular deep blue, it was black. Endless. And something moved. At first, it was subtle. A shadow shifting far below. Then it grew larger, rising toward me. Panicking, I kicked hard for the edge of the pool. But my body felt heavier, like the water had thickened, pulling me down with invisible hands. I clawed my way forward, gasping as I reached the edge and hoisted myself out. My limbs shook as I collapsed onto the cold tiles. Looking back at the pool, I saw the surface again, perfectly still. For a moment, I thought I imagined it, until I noticed wet footprints leading away from the water. They weren't mine. The prints were massive, too wide and too long to belong to a person. They stretched across the deck and vanished into the darkened locker room. I stared, frozen, until a noise broke the silence. A low, gurgling sound coming from the pool behind me. Slowly, I turned around. The water in the deep end was boiling, churning violently as if something massive was thrashing beneath. A hand erupted from the surface, pale and webbed, with unnaturally long fingers that clawed at the air. Then, a head followed. It wasn't human. Its eyes were milky white, its skin stretched tight over its skeletal face. Black water poured from its gaping mouth as it pulled itself further out. I bolted. I don't remember how I got out of the facility, but I ran until I collapsed outside on the pavement, my lungs burning. I never swam there again. A week later, I heard the news. A boy drowned in the same pool during a late-night swim. The lifeguards found him floating in the center of the deep end. His face was twisted in terror, his fingernails shredded from clawing at the tiles. People say it was an accident, but I know what's in that water, and it's still waiting.